Testing, 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 testing. Good? All right, cheers. Thank you.
Was the mic? You think it was the mic? So have you labelled the other mic? Can you? The broken one. Can you mark it up?
Good morning, everybody. I'm pleased this morning to be launching Operation Fortress, which builds on Operation Restoring Justice, which Zia and I launched last year. This major crisis that Europe's facing began really in earnest in 2015. It followed the disastrous war in Libya and led to large numbers of people beginning to cross the Mediterranean in boats. I was there in the European Parliament at the time. The Commission President, Jean-Claude Juncker, saw this as an opportunity for the first time to launch the common EU refugee and asylum policy. What it meant was that if anybody set foot on EU soil, they would be allowed to stay. I warned against it, I railed against it, but of course to no avail. And that stupidity was compounded, of course, by Angela Merkel, saying anyone that wants to come, we can manage, we can accommodate you. And it's had pretty dire consequences. One only has to think about what's happened to the city of Malmo, previously a fairly peaceful port, now one of the murder and rape hotspots in the whole of Europe. And in many ways, in the run-up to the referendum in 2016, the reason that I launched that breaking point poster was to say Europe has given itself massive problems for decades to come, but we can avoid this by leaving the European Union and getting back control of our borders. Sadly, governments after 2016 were in power but never really believed in the Brexit project, and even when Brexit finally came, there was no change to our status with the ECHR. And that was why 5 years ago, single-handedly, I went out repeatedly into the English Channel, videoing, YouTubing the growing number of boats crossing the English Channel, and I made the argument that you might just as well put a sign on the White Cliffs of Dover, everyone welcome, because the chances of deportation were then, and are today, so incredibly slim. I said I believed if it wasn't stopped, that it would lead literally, in numerical terms, to an invasion of our country. Well, under the Conservatives, 130,000 people arrived via that route. The vast majority, young males of fighting age, who willfully discard their iPhones and their passports into the English Channel at the 12-mile line. And I've been out and I've filmed that too. In the end, Boris Johnson reacted with a speech at Lid Airport announcing the Rwanda plan. But it was doomed to failure from day one because of our continuing presence as part of the European Convention on Human Rights. I have to say, the fact we've given the French over £1 billion and that their navy still escort boats from a couple of hundred yards off the beach all the way across to a 12-mile line, that is something that needs to stop. And whatever videos or pictures you see of the French police slashing boats, the fact is that the traffickers have become even smarter. And in the last 3 weeks, we've seen several launches coming from as far west as Normandy. All the while, the pull factor of coming to the UK, being able to stay, all the while that pull factor is still there. It doesn't matter how much money we give the French, the boats will continue to come. And of course, many of those that have come are people who in some cases wish us harm or do us harm. As we speak, there is a man, charming chap, Kalashnikov tattooed on his face, currently in prison in this country, who's threatened repeatedly to kill me, and no doubt that promise remains when he's out in a few months' time. But there isn't a single week that goes by where we don't see stories of serious crimes, sexual assaults, rapes, and we know for a fact that many that are now coming come with the deliberate attempt of joining criminal gangs in Britain as soon as they come. But it is worse than that. I first started voicing this again 5 years ago to say this would become, or could become then, a national security emergency. And that is exactly what it is. Repeatedly, I've asked the Prime Minister, well, the last Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, in PMQs, whether he would declare a national security emergency. 2 months ago, I told the Home Secretary and the House of Commons that I had it on the highest authority that the Iranian regime was using the Channel crisis to put their own operatives across the English Channel. I was met by shouts of shame on you. Well, shame on them, because once again it proves that I was ahead of the curve on this, and indeed that is what is happening. So Operation Fortress will be a combined military operation. It will save lives, it will help the French in fulfilling their job of stopping the boats, and it will save a huge amount of money. We are very confident that our policy of securely picking people up and safely taking them back to France, we are entirely confident that that falls within other conventions of international law, and you'll see that argued clearly in this document. And when you think about it, what is the Royal Navy for? If the Royal Navy is not there to protect this country from invasion, then frankly, I can't see what its purpose is. We now see a Conservative shadow Home Secretary going into the English Channel 5 years too late and making exactly the same arguments now that I've made for 5 years. But remember, in their 2010, 15, 17 and 19 manifestos, they promised net migration down to tens of thousands a year and shouldn't be believed. And even since Andy Burnham has become Prime Minister, already 2,000 people have crossed the English Channel. There is an argument doing the rounds in the media that it's okay, it's fine. The numbers are 40% lower than they were this time last year. But it only takes 1 or 2 Iranian terrorists to come into Britain and commit a mass atrocity for this to be a disaster. The Australians faced all of these problems many years ago. They tried offshore processing. They tried a number of things, and in the end what worked was towing the boats back to Indonesia. And since then, hardly a boat has landed in Australia. I am entirely confident that under a reform government, within a fortnight, there would be no more boats. And whilst this issue may not be uppermost in the minds of many in Westminster, I can tell you out in the country, it is. And that comes down to a simple point: fairness. What is fair? What is right? What is wrong? Those who come to Britain legally now go through a long, expensive process. It's unfair on them. And to now see a situation where those that come to Britain illegally, via these means, go to the top of social housing lists all over the country is simply unfair. I do not have much confidence that this Prime Minister will grip this, but I very much hope that I'm wrong, and I will ask Zia to lay out more of the operational details. Thank you.
A nation that cannot control its borders is not a sovereign nation, and Britain is being invaded. For decades, Tory and Labour governments promised to get tough on illegal immigration, and yet year after year after year, tens of thousands of fighting-age males have arrived on our beaches. In fact, the total number of illegal immigrants in this country now stands at well over 1 million. The United Kingdom is being invaded. Over 200,000 people have landed illegally on our shores over 8 years. Now that's a staggering figure, and it exceeds the total number of Allied troops who stormed the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. Those who arrive are unvetted, mainly military-aged men from Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq. Now, they have been rewarded for this by a political class that puts them up in hotels at the British taxpayers' expense, given free meals, free healthcare, free TV licenses, and even free trips to the safari park and to the cinema. And never forget, as Nigel said, that it was the Tories that allowed 130,000 to arrive. Labour is simply continuing their betrayal. Even those that commit heinous crimes are routinely defended by so-called human rights lawyers who succeed in preventing even convicted rapist illegal migrants from being deported. All thanks to Tory and Labour politicians who prioritise the rights of foreign citizens over our own. Now, some of those arriving illegally by boat have already attempted terrorist attacks on our soil. Some have committed gruesome murders. Like on the night of the 20th of October 2024, a 27-year-old young lady called Rhiannon White had just finished her shift at the Park Inn Hotel. She was on the phone to a friend as she walked to the railway station. While she was on the platform, a Sudanese man inexplicably stabbed her 23 times with a screwdriver. She died in hospital 3 days later. Her killer, Deng Majek, had arrived in the UK illegally on a small boat 3 months before the attack. CCTV footage later showed him dancing and laughing. He was living in a hotel at taxpayer expense. Rhiannon's devastated mother said in court, quote, "It's always the undocumented illegal migrants that are doing this, and it's not fair." Also among those arriving are individuals who have actively plotted terror attacks on our soil. Intelligence reports confirm that hostile actors, including Iranian terrorists, are exploiting these very routes. The safety of the British people is being put at risk every single day. And the patience of the British people is now exhausted. We're unwilling to accept that Britain's borders should be open and undefended, unwilling to accept that our own veterans who served our nation with valor and distinction are being evicted from their homes to house fighting-age males from Iraq and Afghanistan who turned up on our beaches uninvited. As Nigel said, this is a national security emergency. Yet, successive Tory and Labour governments have treated this emergency with contemptible weakness. Rather than defending the realm, they have turned state agencies into a free taxi service and provided taxpayer-funded hotels for those who break our laws. They surrendered the English Channel to criminal cartels. Under Nigel's leadership, Reform UK will end this crisis for good. We will launch Operation Fortress, the biggest military operation in the English Channel since the Second World War. Under a Reform government, Prime Minister Farage will order His Majesty's Royal Navy to ensure that not a single unauthorised vessel makes it to the shores of the United Kingdom. Our plan, as you will see in the document, is endorsed by senior former members of our armed forces. It is simple. First, we will create an integrated surveillance command, unifying military and intelligence surveillance to make ours the most surveilled maritime border in the world. Second, any vessel attempting to cross illegally will be intercepted by our armed forces, who will return them back to France. Not a single illegal migrant trying to reach our shores will make it to Britain. To those with no right to enter Britain, our border will be impenetrable. Once the world realizes that crossing the Channel illegally leads only to being intercepted by our Royal Marines and returned to France, the incentive structure breaks. these economic migrants will stop paying smugglers and the boats will stop coming. Now, I know many in the media are clamouring to ask, what happens if the French don't agree and Royal Marines attempt to land people on a beach? Let me be crystal clear. A reform government will show unflinching resolve to ensure that people who set out from France to break into Britain go back to France. That is our policy, not a future negotiating position with the French government. What France gets to decide is how that happens. Now look, we would far rather disembark people in port, walk people down a gangway, and hand them to the French authorities properly. That is more dignified, and it is what we will negotiate for. And keep in mind, the official position of the French government is that they do not want these boats leaving their shores in the first place. Tory and Labour governments have paid them, as Nigel said, £1 billion of British taxpayer money to stop the boats, ostensibly. Our military would, in fact, be helping them comply with the very agreements that they signed. But if the Élysée Palace refuses, make no mistake, His Majesty's Royal Marines will disembark them safely on the very shore they left that morning. Those are the only two options. There is no third option, where a British government under reform just shrugs its shoulders and brings them back to Dover. That policy of Tory and Labour governments that has led to 200,000 illegal migrants arriving on our shores. That was the policy that led to the savage murder of Rhiannon White. The policy that has almost resulted in a mass casualty terrorist attack on our soil. And ask yourself what the alternative picture actually is. A president of France ordering French police onto a beach to block Royal Marines on a humanitarian mission from landing civilians in safety and forcing them back out to sea, directly endangering their lives? Well, that would be a crime against humanity. It is simply not a serious hypothetical that President Macron, or anybody else for that matter, would do that. And I do not believe the French public would stand for it if he did. And to the talking heads and useless politicians claiming this policy will not work, the evidence proves the opposite. In fact, it is the only thing that does. When Australia had a major illegal boats migration crisis, it was only when they launched a major military operation that it stopped. In fact, Tony Abbott's Operation Sovereign Borders cut illegal crossings to zero within weeks. A years-long crisis ended within weeks. And it also saved lives. Between 2007 and 2013, 1,200 migrants tragically died making the journey to Australia. The Australian military operation reduced that to zero. Over 170 migrants have already died trying to come to Britain via the Channel. Reform's proposed military operation to secure our borders will save migrant lives too. Now, expect fierce resistance from the Tory Labour establishment, claiming that this is impossible. Well, they have no choice but to call it impossible, lest they face the reality of their own failures. But the former Navy commanders who engineered this plan leave no room for doubt. It can be done. It must be done. The former senior members of our armed forces who endorsed this plan confirm this plan is viable and imperative to our national security. This is how we will stop the boats for good. Reform will end the invasion of Britain. Reform will put the British people first. Thank you.
Thank you, Zia. We've got one or two questions, starting with Henry Zeffman from the BBC.
Thank you very much, Mr. Farage. This is an eye-catching hardening of your position on small boats. Why now? Is it an attempt to distract from questions about your finances and your party's finances? On which note, in 2024, did you negotiate a deal on what would happen to Reform's finances if you came back as leader at a time when you were suggesting you had no plans to return to electoral politics?
Why now? Because I think what happened in Ceuta over the weekend shows you just how serious this situation is. The British public are getting tired, and I do genuinely think that the Iranian threat is very, very real indeed. So we've gone further. By the way, I'd never ruled this option out in the past. I'd always said it was an option if it came to it. But I think actually, you know what, the country will get behind the message that we have a Royal Navy. It's there to protect this country from invasion, and that now is what it should be used for. In terms of, questions about money could go on for years, you know. I mean, look, I had no intention of returning to politics or as leader of Reform, but in the spring of that year, I did talk to Richard Tice about what the liabilities would be if I was to come back to that position. And you'd be a bit of a mug, wouldn't you, to walk into a job and not find out what the potential liabilities were. And they were substantial. They were substantial. In fact, without Richard, the party wouldn't have even survived. So that was useful for me to know, but it wasn't a deal, it wasn't an agreement, it was subject to if I came back. And if you want clarification on this, that came quite some time after the gift, which is perhaps the important point. Thank you. Olivia Utley, GB News.
You say you'd simply return migrants back to French beaches, even if the French disagree with the plan. Obviously, this all works a lot better if the French do agree with the plan. Have you had any assurances from senior French politicians that they're on board with this?
Can I just say, for the French, there are big upsides, very big upsides. Life from Dunkirk, through Calais, through Ardelot, Wimereux, all those rather beautiful little villages on Côte d'Opale, life is now hell. People stay locked in their houses. You can't resell a house. There's crime, there's litter, there's vandalism, there's gang violence, there are stabbings, there are shootings. I mean, dealing with this problem would be a great, great relief to the people of northern France. So that's the first thing I would say. There is a big upside for the French in this. Have we had talks with some senior French political figures about this? Yes, and I think attitudes are starting to change. Attitudes towards this are starting to change, you know, and they're also beginning to realise that we have given them a lot of money, and this would in fact be helping them with their objectives. So are we there yet? Can I guarantee you that they'll welcome this with open arms? I can't, but can I say there is a softening of attitude towards this position? Yes. And of course, we have some very major French elections coming up next year. Do I add to that?
Well, look, as Nigel said, as you'll see in this document, we envisage two positions from the French. One in which they consent, which is vastly preferable, and that will be our primary objective. However, if they choose not to consent, we have a plan for that too.
All right. Thank you. Carl Dinnan, ITV.
Thanks very much. Over here. Just to be clear, so you seem to be saying that if the French do not consent to accepting these people back, you are going to order the Royal Marines to land on French beaches against the will of the French to offload these people. Is that legal? And secondly, you seem to have just admitted that you were considering returning as Reform leader in the spring of 2024. Can you be absolutely clear and honest? When did you start thinking about returning to Parliament and becoming the leader of the Reform Party?
I was being bullied for months and months and months by lots and lots of people. You've got to come back, you've got to come back, you've got to come back. I said, no, no. I mean, to be honest with you, I was probably 60-40 in favour of going to America because there was an exciting 6 months coming up over there. So all of this was provisional. None of us ever quite know what we're going to do next in life. And look, you know, when Rishi called the election, I just thought, well, the hell with it, I'm not going to do it, and that's that. And then yet more guilt was piled upon me, and I reluctantly at the last minute changed my mind. But no, there was no plan to come back at all. There were lots of people asking me to, all right? Simple as that. Sorry, the first part of your question specifically.
What's the legality of sending the military to land on French beaches?
Saving lives at sea. Saving lives at sea under international law when people are in, and these big mega dinghies, you saw one last week with 165 on, 90 to 100 is now common. If you've ever seen one of them, and I've seen many of them, they're built for one trip. They've got balsa wood glued in the bottom. It is astonishing that we've not had a mass casualty event for some time. And indeed, the last big one happened at night, and there just happened to be a scallop boat next to them. Otherwise, that would have been 40 gone. And you're going through the world's busiest shipping lanes. You're prone to fog. Actually, picking these people up out of flimsy boats and returning them to the nearest safe destination and to a safe country, we believe is entirely in keeping with the international law of the sea, going back for, gosh, I mean, well over 100 years. Now, that doesn't mean the French government themselves will welcome it, but hey, we've given them £1 billion to stop the boats, we're just helping them.
Yeah, and I would add to that. Obviously, our position is one of the first things Nigel will do as Prime Minister is lead the ECHR, but article of the ECHR it demands that you protect life. The laws of the sea, the prevailing obligation on anybody who comes across a vessel in distress is to protect life. That is exactly what we would be doing. And by the way, find me another route in which, in between two developed countries, two first world top 10 economy countries, or 1 in every 100 people making the journey are dying. Every single one of those vessels, those people are in distress. They need to be rescued. Listen, our priority is Britain. We don't want any more British people to be murdered by illegal migrants coming across the channel. We don't want a mass casualty terror attack, but we also don't want any migrants perishing, tragically, trying to make the journey. That is our position. If people want to take a different one, that's up to them.
Alex Rogers, Sky News.
Question for Nigel. Last year, when you announced your policy for mass deportations, you said the boats would start coming in days because there will be no incentive. Why then do you need this policy of involving the Navy? And a second, if I may, your former MP Rupert Lowe has offered you a pact of working together. You haven't explicitly ruled it out, but can you rule it out now? And are you able to offer reassurance to your colleagues who defected from the Tories that you would never do a deal that would see them lose their cabinet positions?
Right. Look, this does not replace Operation Restoring Justice, not a bit of it. What it does is to update Operation Restoring Justice, which did, as an option, say we would consider this as the next step. Do you know, the British public are sceptical that anybody, any government, that allows people to come in, be processed through Dover and Manston, will ever actually get the legal frameworks right to deport them. Even though we assure them that we'll do all of these things, this, I think, puts it out in starker, clearer terms. It's very easy to understand the concept that the Royal Navy is there to protect against foreign invasion. And actually, you know what? The 1971 Nationality Act still applies, that it is an offence to illegally enter our country. It's just that the last two governments don't seem to have cared about it. On the Rupert Lowe stuff, well, my understanding is that he had a bit of a fallout last week with the Conservatives, who, you know, he had been working quite closely with for some time. You know, he said that he had a deal with the Conservatives, and Kemi Badenoch said they had an arrangement. I don't know what that was. My understanding is there was a bit of a fallout. Now, look, I mean, if you want to do a political deal with somebody, you know, you would contact them privately and not do a 12-minute video. That said, I did actually reach out back yesterday to him. I did say, look, should we have a call? I haven't heard back yet, so I don't know what the sincerity of this is. But it seemed to me that he was sort of, more than anything, perhaps putting out this gesture, saying, look, I'm the good guy, Nigel's the bad guy. Well, that's not the case. If you look at my history, you know, in politics over the last few years, I am prepared to do things and make sacrifices if I believe it's in the national interest. I certainly did that in 2019, and I would do whatever I could for us to have a sane centre-right alliance that beat Labour at the next general election. But I don't ditch my friends, I don't ditch my allies, whether that's Suella Braverman or Posh George. You know, I do not ditch people because somebody else wants me to. And there's an irony in this, which is that 2 years ago, Rupert Lowe said what a fantastic job Jenrick, Braverman and Kruger were doing inside the Conservative Party. And, you know, unlike Chris Philp, who failed completely, but now wants to sort of forget it, in the case of Braverman and Jenrick, they resigned from their positions in their frustration that the government wouldn't get a grip. So that would not be a part of a negotiation. In broader terms, look, you know, you could see a situation where Restore, without the hope of winning anything outside Great Yarmouth, I mean literally without a hope of winning a single seat in the country, could do us great harm. And I think online you will see a lot of Restore potential voters now beginning to worry about the impact that might have. So look, I'll finalise that by saying if it was the offer of a deal, it came in a very unusual way. I have responded to it potentially, you know, with an open mind, as I would, but I'm certainly not going to be ditching people that I view to be allies and a great asset. Thank you for the question. Christian Calgie, Danemar.
Hello. Just a couple of questions on this, the policy itself. When you just mentioned Robert Jenrick, when he was Immigration Minister, he actually ditched plans to turn dinghies back to France in 2022 on the grounds that it was unsafe. That was the then government's assessment. Why do you clearly believe it can now be done in a safe way?
Stop. This is not pushback. Pushback is difficult and dangerous. You know, when you get a spring tide and an ebb running through the Straits of Dover, believe you me, operating pushback without capsizing a boat would be incredibly difficult to do. We are not talking about that. We are talking about rescue and return. It is a completely different concept.
Okay, thank you for that one. You say this plan will save a huge amount of money. Are you, there are questions about the Navy's actual boat capacity with offshore patrol vessels. Is it not the case that you would have to spend a sizable amount of money increasing the number in the arsenal? And just to pick up on the question we just had about this offer from Mr. Lowe, you called for a broad coalition last night, and clearly you are very open-minded, surprisingly so about Mr. Lowe. Do you think that broad coalition needs to include the Conservatives?
I'm open-minded about talks. I'm open-minded about talks with people who I think share a similar, albeit in some cases slightly different, objective. And I've always been open-minded. I'll talk to anybody who's got a similar goal to me. The difficulty with the Conservatives is how can I believe a word Chris Philp says when they, you know, I mean, how can you tell people in 4 consecutive manifestos you'll reduce illegal migration and deport those that come illegally and do the opposite? And if they've done it for 4 manifestos in a row, why on earth should I or the public believe them on a 5th? That's how I see that right at this moment in time. Okay, I don't think what no one's really got a grip on here is the sheer scale and cost of what happens in the English Channel every single day. You know, I know this subject well. Go to Ramsgate Harbour. You will see 4 great big cutters. Those cutters are used by Border Force, but of course, we would have Border Force working in conjunction, in many cases, with Royal Marines, soldiers, whatever else made this joint military operation work. So those boats are there, they're fully staffed, they're fully manned, they're available, and it won't cost any more than it's currently costing, frankly, to operate. You've also, in Ramsgate Harbour, got 2 other boats on big 7-figure money. Do you know what their job is? To go up and down the channel and pick up the empties. Literally millions of pounds a year just to pick up empty dinghies and taken back to Ramsgate. Go to Lydd. Go to Lydd Airport, where you'll see spotter planes, a gigantic drone, a small drone, other spotter planes from Norfolk, sometimes coming down to help. And then, of course, you've got the RNLI, who, whilst that's not taxpayers' money, but still money, on a busy day, you'll have the lifeboats of Ramsgate, Walmer, Dover, Dungeness, Rye, and even Eastbourne. If you literally came out and saw the mass scale of operation, the daily operational cost of hundreds of thousands of pounds a day, you would realise we've actually got the kit already. We've just not chosen to use it to stop people from coming. The only upgrade that would be needed here would be for a couple of naval patrol vessels to be in the Channel, and as I understand it, there are 3 of those currently at sea around the United Kingdom. We are spending all the money on these assets just to act as a taxi service on behalf of illegal criminal gangs, bringing people into Britain. I'm not upping the cost, I'm just saying these people will not be allowed to come. Okay. Raheem Kassam, National Pulse.
Thank you both. I'm sure it wouldn't have escaped your attention this morning that the first question you got was unrelated to the subject of the press conference, and I kind of wonder what are your thoughts on how the mainstream media has been treating you and those around you recently. Last week we broke a story that the Prime Minister's new Chief of Staff co-authored a report denying the grooming gang scandal alongside a convicted paedophile. And yet it doesn't get coverage in the mainstream media, but they will go through, every member of your family's addresses and all of that stuff. So what is your thoughts on that? And then secondly, in terms of Rupert Lowe, wouldn't it have been better, rather than him doing a 12-minute video, very well produced, interesting music bed and all of that, to just start by saying to the people that he abused in Reform the words, "I'm sorry"?
Well, look, as far as that's concerned, Restore have spent most of their time attacking Reform and attacking Reform individuals endlessly, relentlessly. They haven't until now criticised the Conservatives at all. There was some kind of deal between the two. Don't ask me what it was. I just know that it erupted and blew up last week. So you might see a change of tack on that. There is this myth. There is this myth that I fell out with Rupert Lowe. It's not true. Everyone fell out with Rupert Lowe. And it was the screaming, the shouting, the threatening, the legal writs. Everyone fell out with him, all right? But look, if you have to speak to people or make arrangements with people that you've previously fallen out with, if there is a greater good to be had from that, then I'm not closing my mind to it. Sorry would be nice, but I would have thought unlikely to be forthcoming. Look, I just feel that there's been a one-sided pile-on against Reform. I don't think people's family members would be... I don't think Kemi Badenoch's family members or Andy Burnham's family members would be subject to the harassment and increased security risk that mine have been. I've only spoken about a very little part of this. I don't believe it would happen. And, if every time the name George Cottrell is mentioned, you write career criminal next to it, well, please make sure, folks, in the interest of fairness, you do the same with Louise Hay, and you make sure every time that Johnny Reynolds is mentioned, you do put next to it the fact that he had a false CV and that Angela Rayner didn't pay her tax. I think, without appearing to be whingers, I do think we have come under a level of attack that would not be seen by another party if it was part of the establishment, which we're not. Let's go on to Peter Schnettwanger's Daily Telegraph.
Morning, Nigel. You mentioned there earlier in one of the earlier questions that you were open-minded to a deal and then a conversation with Mr. Lowe. He set out these red lines under which he would do some sort of pact. What are your red lines?
I said I'm open-minded to a conversation. A conversation is different to a negotiation. I opened the door to that conversation yesterday, late morning, and at the moment I haven't yet had a reply. We will find out whether he genuinely wants to have talks. If he does, then we'll start to negotiate. But these things, if anything like this was to happen, it would not happen overnight. It would go through a whole series of stages. as I say, whatever's been said in the past, you know, I'm prepared to put that aside and have a conversation. But I'm not going to commit myself to anything more than that right now. And he seems to have given us a shopping list, some of which I have no desire to meet. Interestingly, on policy terms, you know, actually most of the things he talks about are things that I've championed for over a quarter of a century. We'll see. Thank you very much. Michael Knowles from The Express.
Thank you, Nigel. Your policy document indicates that the Royal Marines and the Royal Navy will have the potential to use lethal force in self-defence or in defence of others. Would that include a situation where a migrant is trying to sink the dinghy to avoid detention? And just following on from our investigation that was on the front page this morning, should foreign criminals be banned from dispersal accommodation? Thank you.
Shall I take the... Yeah. So let me just address the one with regarding to weapons posture and lethal force in this operation. That specific scenario you're talking about, those are going to be left to the operational decisions of commanding officers in our armed forces at a given time. The context of us saying that this military operation will give the Navy the ability to use lethal force, it's a very specific thing. It is where our intelligence agencies have confirmed the presence and have confirmed identification of, for example, an IRGC fighter, whom they have intelligence is on their way to Britain to commit a mass casualty attack, to commit an atrocity. Or, for example, a people smuggling gang member who is potentially killing people on board and throwing them into the sea. Okay? In such a scenario where we have confirmed intelligence, they will have authorization for that, specifically to protect innocent life. That is the only scenario in which it would be, they would use it. The specific scenario you're talking about would be, as I said, down to operational decisions by the military. But as Nigel said, as I have said, this is a humanitarian mission. Operation Fortress is a humanitarian mission. It is a rescue mission, as we saw with Operation Sovereign Borders in Australia, that reduced deaths from 1,200 in the preceding 6 years to 0 within a matter of weeks and into perpetuity. This operation will save innocent lives.
If you're in the separation zone approaching our 12-mile line and you see you know, our cutters or our ribs or one of our patrol boats there waiting for you, there's not much point slashing the dinghy and going in the water because we are going to act very quickly to save you and take you back to the nearest safe point, which will be a French port. It just wouldn't work. It just wouldn't work. What they have tried, you know, I will say this, what they have tried to do is dinghies leaving French beaches. In the early days of this, I'm talking 18, 19, those years, in the early days of this, when the French Navy approached them to do their job, and by the way, if I leave Boulogne Harbour on a pleasure boat and I'm not licensed in France, I will be impounded and finish up in the magistrate's court the next day. So when these dinghies started leaving from French beaches and the naval rib would go up to one of them, they'd hold a child up and threaten to chuck the child in the sea if they were apprehended. That was what made the French Navy nervous in the early days. But they felt they could do that because they knew once they got to 12 miles from the UK that they would be taken in. This whole thing reverses. This whole thing reverses. Everyone's job becomes easier. The French Navy's job becomes easier. The French police's job becomes easier if we are absolutely clear that you are not coming past that line. You are not going to be allowed to stay in Britain. You will not be able to claim refugee status if you come via this route. So to sink a dinghy under that new set of rules would be entirely self-defeating. Thank you. Tom Scottson from The Sun.
Thank you. The Sun today revealed that taxpayers are forking out £8,000 every time French police stop a small boat migrant. Would you continue to honour this deal if Reform were in government? And my second question for Zia. Rupert Lowe was actually originally suspended because of threats of physical violence towards you. Would you feel threatened if he was let into the fold or some sort of alliance in any way?
Look, all these deals with the French, we have just handed over more and more money. The more money we hand over, the more migrants that come. Would appear to have been the deal for most of it, perhaps not the last year. As I repeat, if this operation that we talked about today was put into practice, it would, in short order, save this country certainly 2, maybe 3, maybe more billions of pounds every single year. And the long-term saving of it would be absolutely enormous. Are you frightened of Rupert?
Well, look, specifically, because I was asked this already, I think, this morning, you know, my feelings towards Rupert are not remotely relevant relative to the fate of the country and the millions, tens of millions of British people around this country who want secure borders, who want an end to illegal immigration, who want mass deportation of illegal immigrants, who want the upholding of law and order, want taxes to come down, all of the things that I know Restore voters, a lot of Conservative voters and Reform voters all want. That is what matters. I want to point out also, just because we've had a lot of questions about costs, and I've been asked, I did the morning round this morning, I was very interested in how many people were asking about the costs. Let's put the costs in context, okay? So if you just take the last 5 years and you just look at how much the British taxpayer has been forced to pay just for accommodation, forget about all the other costs, just the accommodation in hotels and HMOs for illegal migrants coming across the channel illegally, i.e. the very people subject to this policy. Do you know what we could have done with the money? We could have purchased 4 HMS Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carriers. That is our flagship carrier, one of the biggest carriers on the planet, okay? So not only is it going to save huge amounts of money by stopping the boats, as is obvious and demonstrated by what the Australians did, it is also, by the way, as Nigel said, what is the point of His Majesty's Royal Navy? It is, if it is not there to repel an invasion and defend our borders.
Absolutely. Poppy Coburn, Daily Tea.
You say in your own document, and you use the example of Operation Isotrope, and you quote a Navy source saying that pushbacks are not part of their ethics. Now, your plan, you say, is not about pushbacks, but correct me if I'm wrong, it is about forcibly escorting boats back. Do you think this plan will align with the Navy's ethics?
No. No pushbacks, no escorts. We're not escorting anybody anywhere. We are recognising that a flimsy dinghy with a balsa wood bottom and a dodgy outboard is a dangerous situation for human beings to go in, which could go wrong at the drop of a hat, right? And so what we are doing is we are rescuing those people from a dangerous situation and taking them back to the safest next point, which is where they come from a very safe country. And, you know, Isotrope got that wrong. They hadn't thought that through fully. Plus, let's be frank, they didn't have the will to carry it out anyway. So when I saw the Royal Navy vessels in the channel that Pretty had put there, well, it was great for a photograph, but it didn't actually achieve anything. So this is a completely different concept, and one that we absolutely, and you know, the arguments are made in here, but one we believe really does actually work inside all the accepted rules of maritime law.
And can I just add that anyone who's dealt with lawyers of any sort, which is sadly probably everyone in this room and everyone watching this now these days, will know you can find a lawyer, if you pay them, they'll give you any opinion you want. That, the thing you just cited there, that opinion you just cited there, has never been tested in court. And so as Nigel said, not only are we doing something different, you know, if somebody wants to cite a legal opinion, well, put it alongside. You saw that BBC, of all people, was the BBC. Do you remember they undercover found lawyers, qualified lawyers, helping illegal migrants commit fraud in order to be able to stay in this country. So it was never tested in court, and as Nigel said, we're doing something very different anyway.
Absolutely. Adam Cherry, Guido Fawkes.
So as you mentioned, the Channel is one of the busiest commercial shipping routes in the world, and obviously if you've got a more significant naval presence there, are you worried about the impact that will have on businesses pulling out?
No. No, the shipping lanes are very, very clearly defined, both the east to west route, which is the northern route, and the west to east route. And these lanes surprise you actually how narrow the shipping lanes are. And yeah, sure, they're incredibly busy. And crossing those lanes is very, very dangerous. But the waters in which Border Force and Navy, Marines, Army, etc. would work are comfortably within those 2 lanes. And you know, think about it, cross-channel ferries go back and forth every day and manage just about to navigate their way through. It is a very dangerous place. I mean, one thing, Adam, I am amazed. You know, when you're out there and you know, Coast Guard knows there isn't a migrant boat or migrant boats, they're constantly putting out warnings on Channel 16. And so the big, you know, the big tankers, ships are on the lookout. But, you know, all it needs is one foggy day and it'll wipe out 100 people. I'm amazed it hasn't happened. I literally am amazed we have not had more. Lots of little disasters. 170 dead that we know of. I'm sure the figure is much, much, much higher than that. But no, this policy will stop and take away that risk of mass casualties. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
So, Zia, you're going to stay and do one of the ones. We'll do a quick picture together, yeah? Where do you want us? Just here? There we go. You hold that up there. Oh, bother that.